nation on the edge, 1914 to 1917. When war erupted in Europe in the summer of 1914, most Americans experienced it as distant thunder. Loud enough to notice, far enough away to ignore. Newspapers carried alarming headlines about assassinations, mobilizations, and battles with unfamiliar names. But for the average American family, daily life continued uninterrupted. Children still went to school, factories still hummed, farms still demanded labor. The United States, protected by oceans and guided by a long tradition of avoiding European wars, declared neutrality. Yet beneath this calm surface, the conflict was already reshaping American society in subtle but powerful ways. President Woodrow Wilson's call for neutrality was not merely political, it was deeply personal. America was a nation of immigrants, and the war threatened to tear communities apart. German Americans, Irish Americans, British expatriates, and Eastern European immigrants lived side by side, each with emotional ties to the warring nations. Churches, newspapers, and social clubs debated the conflict fiercely. Even within families, loyalties could clash. The home front became a place of quiet tension, where global events seeped into kitchens, classrooms, and town halls. Economically, the war began transforming America almost immediately. European nations desperate for supplies turned to American farms and factories. Orders for wheat, steel, weapons, and textiles surged. Railroads expanded, ports bustled, and factories ran longer hours. While Europe bled, America boomed. This sudden prosperity masked the moral dilemma forming at the heart of the nation. Could the United States truly remain neutral while profiting from war? On the home front, prosperity and unease grew side by side. For women, the war years marked a turning point long before America officially entered the conflict. With European labor diverted to battlefields, American women increasingly filled roles in factories, offices, and farms. They organized relief drives, sewed uniforms for foreign armies, and raised money for humanitarian causes. Organizations like the Red Cross expanded rapidly, drawing millions of women into public life. These efforts quietly challenged traditional gender roles, planting seeds of change that would soon reshape American society. Children, too, felt the war's presence. Schools organized penny drives for European orphans, taught lessons about global geography, and encouraged patriotic service, even while the nation remained neutral. Boys played war games in the streets, mimicking battles they barely understood. Girls rolled bandages and collected supplies. For an entire generation, World War I became the first global crisis they experienced collectively, shaping their worldview long before they were old enough to vote or fight. Meanwhile, the American press played a powerful role in shaping public perception. Newspapers relied heavily on British sources for war reporting, subtly influencing sympathies. Graphic stories of German atrocities, some exaggerated or fabricated, circulated widely. Editorials increasingly framed the war as a moral struggle rather than a political one. On the home front, words became weapons, slowly shifting public opinion long before soldiers ever boarded ships. German Americans soon found themselves under growing suspicion. Once respected as hardworking citizens, many faced harassment, vandalism, and social exclusion. German-language newspapers closed. Schools stopped teaching German. Even foods were renamed. Sauerkraut became Liberty Cabbage. The home front revealed how fear could erode civil liberties, turning neighbors into suspects almost overnight. The sinking of the Lusitania in 1915 sent shockwaves through American households. Nearly 1,200 passengers died, including 128 Americans. Newspapers printed haunting illustrations and survivor accounts. While the U.S. still did not enter the war, dinner table conversations grew darker. Mothers worried about sons. Business owners worried about trade routes. Neutrality no longer felt secure. The ocean no longer felt like protection. As the war dragged on, American households faced rising prices and shortages. European demand drove up food costs at home, straining working-class families. Farmers prospered, but urban consumers struggled. This economic imbalance fueled resentment and labor unrest. Strikes increased. The war abroad began reshaping class tensions at home, revealing cracks in the American dream. Pacifist movements gained strength during these years. Religious groups, socialists, and progressive reformers warned against entanglement in what they saw as an imperialist conflict. Large rallies called for peace. Pamphlets circulated urging restraint. The home front became a battleground of ideas, where patriotism and dissent collided long before censorship laws silenced opposition. African Americans viewed the war through a different lens. Many hoped that supporting democracy abroad would strengthen demands for equality at home. Black newspapers debated whether loyalty would bring justice or betrayal. Meanwhile, the Great Migration accelerated, as thousands moved north to fill industrial jobs left vacant by European labor shortages. The home front became a place of both opportunity and racial tension. Churches played a central role in shaping moral attitudes. Sermons framed the conflict as a test of civilization, righteousness, or divine will. Some pastors preached peace, others called for preparedness. Religious institutions became spaces where fear, hope, and moral certainty intertwined, guiding communities through uncertainty. By 1916, preparedness campaigns gained momentum. Parades, military drills, and patriotic events filled American streets. Civilians practiced marching. Boys joined cadet programs. Factories began shifting toward potential wartime production. Though America was still officially neutral, the home front was quietly preparing for war. The presidential election of 1916 revealed a nation deeply divided. Wilson campaigned on the slogan, "He kept us out of war," while simultaneously expanding military readiness. Families followed election results anxiously, understanding that the outcome could determine whether their sons would one day wear uniforms. Politics became personal. When Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare in early 1917, the fragile balance collapsed. Telegrams, headlines, and rumors spread rapidly. The Zimmermann telegram, promising Mexico U.S. territory in exchange for alliance, ignited outrage. On the home front, disbelief turned to anger. Neutrality no longer seemed possible. As America edged toward war, the home front stood at a crossroads. Years of economic change, social tension, propaganda, and moral debate had prepared the nation psychologically long before the first troop mobilizations. When war finally came, it would not arrive suddenly, it would feel inevitable. The American home front was already at war in spirit, even before the first soldier crossed the Atlantic. Mobilizing the home front, 1917 to 1918. When the United States formally entered World War I in April 1917, the declaration of war did not simply mobilize soldiers. It mobilized an entire society. Almost overnight, the American home front transformed into a vast, coordinated engine of war. Factories, farms, schools, churches, and households were all enlisted in the national effort. The conflict was no longer a distant European catastrophe. It was now a personal obligation felt in every town and city across the nation. The federal government expanded its power in unprecedented ways. New agencies sprang into existence almost monthly, each designed to regulate some aspect of daily life. The War Industries Board directed factories on what to produce and how much. The Food Administration told families what and how to eat. Posters appeared everywhere, reminding civilians that victory depended on their discipline. The home front became a controlled environment, where sacrifice was framed as patriotism and obedience as duty. Food became one of the most visible symbols of wartime participation. Americans were urged to observe meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays. Victory gardens sprouted in backyards, schoolyards, and even city parks. Housewives were told they were soldiers of the kitchen, fighting hunger and waste. Cooking manuals and newspaper columns transformed frugality into a moral virtue. Every meal became a reminder that the war reached directly into the American home. Industrial labor surged to levels never before seen. With millions of men drafted, factories turned increasingly to women and minorities. Women worked as machinists, welders, clerks, and streetcar conductors. African Americans filled industrial jobs in northern cities, accelerating the Great Migration. These changes challenged long-standing social hierarchies. On the home front, necessity forced progress, even as prejudice and inequality remained deeply entrenched. Children were mobilized in uniquely symbolic ways. Schools taught lessons on loyalty, thrift, and obedience. Students bought war bonds with pocket change, collected scrap metal, and knitted scarves for soldiers overseas. Patriotic rituals became routine. Flag salutes, national songs, and loyalty pledges framed daily life. For young Americans, citizenship was no longer abstract. It was practiced every day in classrooms and playgrounds. The propaganda campaign was relentless and sophisticated. The Committee on Public Information flooded the nation with posters, pamphlets, films, and speeches. For Minutemen delivered emotional pro-war talks in theaters and public spaces. The enemy was portrayed in stark, often racist caricatures. On the home front, persuasion blurred into manipulation, shaping emotions as carefully as factories shaped weapons. Dissent, once tolerated, now became dangerous. The Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918 criminalized criticism of the government, the war, and even the draft. Thousands were arrested. Newspapers were shut down. Ordinary citizens were encouraged to report suspicious behavior. The home front became a place where silence often felt safer than speech, and patriotism was measured by conformity. German Americans endured the harshest consequences of wartime hysteria. Communities erased German culture from public life. Music by German composers was banned. Street names changed. Families anglicized their surnames. Some were arrested or attacked by mobs. The home front revealed how quickly fear could strip away the protections of citizenship. The draft reshaped family life across the country. Registration days were emotionally charged events. Mothers watched sons line up at local courthouses, knowing many would never return. Letters from training camps became treasured objects, read and reread by entire families. The war entered homes through envelopes and telegrams, each one carrying hope or dread. Women's roles expanded dramatically, but not without tension. While praised for their service, women were also reminded that their work was temporary. Government messaging emphasized that these changes did not threaten traditional family structures. Still, the experience altered expectations forever. The home front became a proving ground for women's political and social advancement, strengthening the case for suffrage. African American communities faced a bitter contradiction. While contributing labor, money, and military service, they encountered violence and discrimination at home. Race riots erupted in northern cities as competition for jobs and housing intensified. Black soldiers trained in segregated units. On the home front, the promise of democracy abroad clashed painfully with injustice at home. Religion again played a central role, now infused with militant patriotism. Churches organized bond drives, prayed for victory, and framed the war as a moral crusade. Ministers urged congregations to support the troops and suppress doubt. Faith provided comfort, but also reinforced the idea that the war was righteous and inevitable. War bonds became a financial and emotional commitment. Posters showed soldiers in peril, urging civilians to do their part. Communities competed to exceed bond quotas. Purchasing bonds was both an investment and a public declaration of loyalty. On the home front, money itself became a weapon. As casualty lists grew, grief became a shared experience. Newspapers printed names of the dead. Churches held memorial services. Black-bordered letters arrived unannounced. The home front learned to live with absence. Empty chairs at dinner tables, unopened bedrooms, futures abruptly ended. By late 1918, exhaustion spread across American society. Factories strained, workers protested, and families longed for normalcy. Yet the machinery of war continued relentlessly. The home front had become accustomed to sacrifice, even as it yearned for peace. When the armistice was announced on November 11, 1918, celebrations erupted across the nation. Church bells rang, crowds filled streets, and strangers embraced. But beneath the joy lay deep scars. The home front had been permanently transformed, politically, socially, and emotionally. The war was over, but its consequences were only beginning. Aftermath, memory, and the war that followed home. When the guns fell silent in Europe, many Americans believed the hardest part of the war was over. Victory parades filled city streets, newspapers proclaimed a new era of peace, and families clung to the hope that sacrifice had finally ended. Yet, on the home front, the war lingered in quieter, more enduring ways. The return to normal life proved far more difficult than anyone expected. The nation had changed, and there was no clear path back. Millions of soldiers came home carrying invisible wounds. Shell shock, what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress, haunted veterans and their families. Sleepless nights, sudden outbursts, and emotional distance strained marriages and households. The home front became the front line of recovery, where wives, parents, and children struggled to understand men who had left as sons and returned as strangers. Physical injuries were impossible to ignore. Amputees, the blind, and the disfigured became a common sight in American towns. Government programs attempted rehabilitation, but resources were limited. Families adapted homes to care for wounded relatives, turning kitchens into sick rooms and daughters into caregivers. The war reshaped domestic life long after the armistice. Economic turbulence followed the celebrations. Wartime industries shut down abruptly, and millions of workers lost jobs. Inflation surged while wages fell. Strikes erupted across the country, as laborers demanded fair treatment after years of sacrifice. On the home front, frustration replaced unity, and the promise of post-war prosperity faded quickly. Women faced a painful reversal. Many were pushed out of jobs to make room for returning soldiers. Wartime praise gave way to expectations of domesticity. Yet the experience of independence could not be erased. The home front had awakened new ambitions, and resistance to returning to pre-war roles fueled social change. In 1920, women finally gained the right to vote with the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Though not solely a result of the war, the massive contributions of women on the home front strengthened the argument for political equality. Ballots became a quiet acknowledgement that wartime sacrifice had earned lasting recognition. African American veterans returned with heightened expectations and faced brutal disappointment. Despite their service, segregation and violence persisted. The Red Summer of 1919 saw racial riots erupt across American cities. On the home front, the war had intensified both hope and resistance, setting the stage for future civil rights struggles. The influenza pandemic of 1918 to 1919 delivered a final, devastating blow. More Americans died from the flu than from combat. Entire families were wiped out. Schools closed, public gatherings were banned, and mourning became universal. The home front, already exhausted by war, now faced grief on an unprecedented scale. Cultural memory of the war took shape in monuments, ceremonies, and rituals. Town squares erected memorials bearing the names of the dead. Armistice Day became a national observance. The home front preserved the war through remembrance, ensuring that sacrifice would not be forgotten, even as many sought to move on. Literature and art captured the war's emotional aftermath. Writers described disillusionment, loss, and the hollow nature of victory. Families recognized their own experiences in these stories. The home front found a voice through novels, poems, and memoirs that refused to romanticize what had been endured. Politically, the war left America wary of global entanglements. The Senate rejected the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations. Many citizens believed the sacrifices of the home front had been exploited. Isolationism became a protective instinct, rooted in exhaustion and skepticism. Veterans organizations emerged as powerful social forces. Groups like the American Legion provided camaraderie and advocacy. Parades, reunions, and community events allowed veterans and civilians to reconnect. The home front slowly rebuilt bonds strained by years of separation and loss. Families continued to live with absence. Some waited years for remains to be returned. Others never received closure. Photographs, letters, and medals became treasured relics. The home front learned to carry grief quietly, passing stories from one generation to the next. The war also reshaped American identity. The United States emerged as a global power, but at great personal cost. Citizens understood that modern warfare demanded total national involvement. The home front would never again be separate from the battlefield. As the 1920s progressed, prosperity returned for some, but the lessons of World War I remained unresolved. Beneath the surface of jazz, optimism, and growth lingered unresolved trauma and inequality. The home front carried the war forward, even as it tried to forget. World War I ended on foreign soil, but its true legacy lived in American homes. In the kitchens where food was once rationed, in the bedrooms where letters were read by candlelight, and in the memories of families forever changed. The home front proved that war is not only fought by soldiers, it is endured by entire nations, long after the last shot is fired.